You just need to meet one person. Just go to the meetup, do one intro. And if you do that, if you go to one meetup every month, it's not going to seem horrible the next time you have to do that cold intro, and then it'll be easy. Looking forward to the very near future where all coders just have to be testers and you don't actually need to do the coding. You just set some assertions and find niches and find exceptions and all these kind of things. And the machine codes for you. The customer wants a solution to their problem. If we solve more problems, we get more job satisfaction. It's a pretty nice alignment.
We're live on the Objective Hiring Show with Hercules. Hercules, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Tim. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. And I believe you're the first person in New Zealand that I've spoken to on this podcast. So it's good to get a cross-Tasman conversation going. So thank you for joining on that front. And it'd be great for our audience just to hear a little bit about yourself, just so they can start to contextualize our conversation today.
Yeah, prepare for a ride around the world. The background is a little bit silly, so I'll try to keep it brief because I've worked in a whole bunch of sectors and industries in a whole bunch of countries. So let me try to keep it punchy here. So my background way back in the day is in scientific research. So I started as a researcher in astrophysics. That's because I decided what I wanted to do when I was 8 years old, and maybe I didn't go past the A's, or I don't know what it was. But I basically dedicated my little boy childhood to becoming a scientist. So then I did. Eventually, I did. It was great fun. It took me to all kinds of places. I studied in the UK and in Chile with its big telescopes. I then went to the US and then to Australia to do postdoctoral research. So that's basically 3 years at a time, placement at a lab somewhere. So that was fantastic. I could work at Penn State University, which is fantastic, and big American university, kind of things you see in the movies. So it was really interesting to have the real experience. And then that eventually brought me to Australia, where I worked in a national lab. It was the Australian Astronomical Observatory. And that started orienting me toward more technical things, which I found out I enjoyed more than prestige, which was a very interesting realization. And then I started building data pipelines, which I had been always as an astrophysicist, but I started getting more serious about solving other people's problems rather than my own research problems. And I got quite addicted to that. It was pretty sweet. So when I kind of got a little bit tired of academia and the grant writing and the boom and bust funding cycle, this was about 10 years ago. I'd spent 10 years in academia. And then I kind of made what ended up being a very much a lateral move. It wasn't much of a move to data science because you kind of do the same things day in, day out, the technical part. And I worked in sustainability to begin with, then kind of big tech. I worked at Atlassian for a few years, which was fantastic. And then moved to New Zealand 5 years ago. And I got to come back to renewables and sustainability. I worked on renewable energy, geothermal energy, tried to get a geothermal AI startup going, which was a lot of fun. And then most recently, about one something year ago, I became the head of data science at a medical research lab, the Malaghan Institute of Medical Research, which is a total trip for me because I'm not a biologist, but I am a scientist. But they hired me as a techie, so it's everything put together in a pretty sweet package.
What a wonderful summary. And yeah, as you said, a trip right around the world. And I'm not sure what the appropriate segue is from astrophysics to hiring, but I'm going to try to make it right now. uh, Hiring is one of those things that's so inaccurate, even at the best of times. Like I was just listening to a podcast yesterday about football, like soccer football, and they were talking about the manager was on there talking about even when they've done all their due diligence, they've done all their research, they've just spent £50 million on bringing a player to their squad, and they get in on the first training session and they're like, "Oh my god, what have we done? This guy's a disaster." So even when there's that amount of money on the line and that amount of money spent, hiring at the best of times is so inaccurate, which I'm assuming is not the same as astrophysics. You've come from like a hard science background where you can actually measure things as like universal truths and whatnot. Yeah, putting you on the spot a little bit, is there anything from your astrophysics and science background that you were able to kind of think of and apply when hiring people and thinking about people in general?
Wow, that's actually a really good question because astrophysics is an exact science, even though the joke among astrophysicists is that you're a million kilometers out, it's no big deal. But then the skills part is a little bit nebulous in that it is assumed that anybody can acquire any skills, which I say not derogatorily. It's true. That's the best part of the training of specifically astronomy, where you have to do all the things. There isn't a technical group next door you can hand over to do your coding for you, to do your stats or anything like that. You have to learn absolutely everything. I remember when I was doing a postdoc in Australia, I needed to kind of break into a new area, sort of. I needed to learn a new thing. So I talked to a professor and he goes, "Yeah, great. You've got a dark matter halo problem. You need to go learn about dark matter halos." And that was the end of that mentorship session because what else is it going to do? Teach me about dark matter halos? No, I've got to spend 2 years figuring that out now. So that part is really interesting because it's a hard science, but the skills are assumed to be attainable. If you've reached that level, you learn the things you want to learn. But then you hire people based on record in terms of delivery, typically. And the delivery is something we do quantify in a very flawed way, but we do quantify it through publications. And we further quantify it through citations. How many people thought your research is interesting or useful? Although on the flip side, if somebody thought your research is awful, they still cite your research. So not a great metric. So you hire based on those attributes that go on your CV. The biggest problem there, and this is a while back, I haven't been involved in it 10 years, maybe it's changed, but the biggest thing was that there are way more people than jobs. So you kind of solve your problem by having a flood of applications. If you're applying for a professorship, as I did once, back in the day, I would have been one of 200 people applying for one job. All of those people have PhDs in astrophysics, which is the requisite. And, probably half of them have got a lot of experience and would be pretty good as professors. And maybe half of those would be very good as professors, and maybe half of those would be very good as professors at specific institute. So that's still, 25 people. So how do you choose among all those people? So there's fault for choice, which is a good problem to have. It's not good when you're the job seeker, but for the employer, it's pretty easy because you just ask around. Essentially, that's the interesting part. When you can't distinguish between your long list of 20 people, you just go ask around because everybody knows everybody, which is where the biggest flaw in the process comes in. It creeps in because you get biased opinions about individual humans.
A bit of cronyism, even in the world of academia and astrophysicists. Still, at the end of the day, it's a little bit about who you know at a certain level, maybe at that dividing line. Reminded me of one of my favorite books that I'm reading at the moment, rereading, kind of the original gangster of self-help books, How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is the Spanish copy here. Just trying to improve my Spanish skills a bit. And yeah, it would certainly advocate a job-seeking process that was focused on who you know and trying to unlocking doors that way. I wonder whether the market's going even more now down that direction, because I keep hearing about, companies putting up job ads, particularly United States and Europe, and they're getting inundated with applicants. Like 200, they'd be like, that would be in an hour. They're getting maybe 1,000 for an average data scientist or analyst role. And so from a job seeker's perspective, I imagine going through the back channel, trying to navigate through who you know, rather than fighting it out with everyone else in an online job portal might be the way to go. Like if you were searching for a job now, how would you approach it?
It's really interesting for me. I've been pretty lucky in that I've known the right people when I needed to know the right people, but also I've just applied cold to various places, especially when we moved to New Zealand. I didn't know anybody. I mean, I had friends, but I didn't have professional connections. And I did end up getting a really nice job when we moved here. Sight unseen. I just applied. I was one of however many applicants, but it is a smaller pool here, so it's the whole country is the size of a largish city. So it is different. I'm in Wellington. There's 200,000 people in Wellington proper, and then under 500,000, I think, in the metro area. So a company of 500 people is huge. It's a different context. So you're not going to get that many applications. You can sort through the old-fashioned way, and it's fine. So that's how I got my first job in New Zealand. And in fact, the job I'm in right now, I also didn't know anybody at the institute, and I got in through the regular sort of method. When I was in Sydney, I can tell you it was the context you're describing. When I was at Atlassian, would get, I don't know, 600 applications for an internship easily. And this was 10 years ago when it was, I don't know, the company was 1,000 people maybe. It's probably about 5,000-6,000 people today, probably bigger. I'm not even sure. So we were getting heaps and heaps and heaps. And then it was still, our recruitment team didn't want to use very niche keyword searches because we would miss out on people. So they had to read all these CVs. They had to actually at least parse all these CVs. And so when I first got my job there, I didn't get through just applying. I don't know, maybe my CV wasn't written the right way. I don't know. I really didn't make it through. I made it through a first pass once, and I never got the call to schedule the interview. And then one of my friends got a job there, and then a week later, I had a job there. So for sure, networking is, all the indications I have is that it's still extremely important.
And then how do you network well? I feel like especially, this is my perception anyway, especially for super junior candidates who maybe have gone through, COVID was their entire university experience. They've worked from home, they've studied from home. Maybe they're at a bit of a network deficit compared to a cohort, let's say my cohort. And I sometimes also feel like the perception of networking is a bit too transactional. Maybe it's like, oh, great, I need a job at this company. I'm going to bomb a bunch of people at this company with a generic LinkedIn message and a generic CV. Like that's not the way to do it. How would you think about networking? What do you think is the kind of right way to approach it?
Since meetups are back, obviously that's a really important one. So there were, as you say, a few years where nobody was meeting in person. So that must have been pretty rough. I was, safely ensconced in a job that I liked back in the day. So I was fine. I didn't need to meet anybody. Although also in Wellington, we barely had a lockdown. We were lucky in that respect. So I'd say, um, in tech, and I definitely include myself in that group, it's always extremely awkward. Nobody really is comfortable with the whole in-person, go to the meetup. Hi, I'm Hercules. It's
Not a lot of pure extroverts.
no, no. I mean, I'm one of those heavily socialized introverts. So I learned how to do it not consciously, but because it's a cultural thing. Where I grew up in Greece, there is no such thing as an introvert. It's not in the 80s.
Oh, really?
No, there was no such thing as, oh, little Johnny likes to read books. He doesn't have to go play with the other kids. No, just go. There was no such thing. So I had to do it. And then I learned how to cope with it, and it was fine. And, that was it's a very different context to how most people grow up, because we acknowledge that, you know, no, this one is bookish. It's fine. Doesn't have to play soccer. So that's, I obviously it was hard, but as a kid, but it taught me that thing that it's just you kind of get yourself into that, and it's very uncomfortable, and it took me a very long time to get okay at it too. But what I always told myself was, and I tell this to everybody, you just need to meet one person. Just go to the meetup, do one intro. And if you do that, if you go to one meetup every month, it's not going to seem horrible the next time you have to do that cold intro, and then it'll be easy. Then you'll know what it is. It's just experience. It's just gaining experience in something that looks icky and weird. And the transactional part, you're right. I mean, that definitely, I felt that's just a weird thing, but Everybody's in on that transaction. That's why the people who are hiring are there as well. It's quite explicit, in fact, at meetups. There's a slot for networking. That's what that is. It's not a weird thing. It's not. I've heard people think that it's even to the point that, oh, it's an unfair advantage of those who aren't at the meetup. Well, yeah, it is, but they didn't come to the meetup.
I'm reminded of another one of my favorite books, actually, which I can see on my bookshelf over there, Atomic Habits. I'm not sure if you've read that one. The premise of the book is basically about how to improve your life by focusing on your good and bad habits and making these kind of small micro changes that through time would compound to have a profound impact. And yeah, the way you were describing your philosophy on the networking reminded me of that book, because you weren't saying, oh my God, I have to go to this function, I have to speak to 50 people, and I have to da, da, da. You kind of set yourself a reasonable, achievable, and unintimidating goal, which then probably helped you do it in the first place, as opposed to overwhelming yourself with too high a goal. And so it reminded me of this book and one of its principles around kind of make it easy. That's the way to make a good habit stick, and a bad habit, get rid of that by making it hard.
That's right. And you'll get good at it over time. It's not, you can't get frustrated at yourself for even failing. I went to the meetup. I I was too uncomfortable to talk to anybody. I didn't talk to anybody. Fine, you'll do it next time. It's not, it doesn't have to happen immediately.
Yes, don't beat yourself up too much. Yeah, for sure. Uh, just to change tracks a little bit away from kind of networking and um, landing roles and those kinds of things, what about on the hiring side of things as a hiring manager? Have you had a chance yet to dabble with AI tools in hiring? Have you seen perhaps candidates on their side use tooling?
I haven't used I haven't used AI tools as a hiring manager, and that's because I'm hiring. I have been hiring for the past year. We've been hiring at the Malaghan. Um, my role was for the first year was to build a team. So there's four of us now, including myself. So there was a whole bunch of time spent on hiring. But again, we're in this interesting niche where we didn't need we weren't overwhelmed with applications, although we were delighted to get. I don't know, we hired a senior data scientist recently, and we had 50 applicants, which for again a country of 5 million is huge, huge, and in a very niche field. It is quite intimidating. For me, it was as well to walk into a biology lab, an immunology lab, and tell people, "Sure, I can do data science here. It's fine." It's really quite it seems really daunting because it's real science. There's people literally curing cancer in that building. So it's quite daunting. So getting about 50 applications was phenomenal. And so I used all the standard tricks. I made sure that the application was clearly written by a human. That's not to say that I wouldn't have used some Gen AI tool to do filler. And I used Gen AI for just first pass at questions and reformatting the phrasing of questions, things like that. So I guess I have used AI tools now that I think of it, but not for making the application. The application was, I wrote it, I just bulleted it, I fleshed it out, I wrote it, and I made sure it sounds like me actually, but slightly more professional to match the institute. So you're clearly reading something that a person wrote who understands what the role is going to be, who understands what your hesitations might be, who understands why it's daunting, who understands all of these things, and who's giving you a really good reason to apply. I made sure to say, "Hey, look, if you don't know biology, that's fine. We'll get you up to speed with all these things. If you know all the data science, come aboard. Or if you don't know all the data science, but you know the biology, great. This is a mix of skills." So making it appear very friendly, right? So a lot of people can apply and kind of try their luck in that process. And then because we got a lot of applicants, but it wasn't overwhelming, we did read the whole panel. There was three of us, yeah, reading every single one and grading every single one, and not in absolute terms, writing pros and cons, having conversations. These are advantages we have because we are very selective, because we're a relatively small institute. So, it's 135, 140 people or something, which again, for New Zealand is quite large, but it's in real terms quite manageable. And because from my perspective, I've been tasked with getting a team of 4 people, that's fine. I can handle that over the course of a year. It's not too much. But, if I were in a place where there's natural turnover and we're hiring every quarter, we're hiring a couple of people, I couldn't have done that.
Do you find in New Zealand that the candidates applying are of any different quality? So, of those 50 CVs, did it appear as though there was almost like a higher relevance than what there had been in other markets you'd hired in?
It's a great question. So let me think about this one sec. We had a few people from overseas applying, and of course, if you're applying for a job in another country, you're really serious about it, so it's not going to be frivolous. So those people were top notch. We had then we had some junior people who were applying who were extremely good at their level, but they just weren't a senior enough level to be considered for this. Uh, yeah, overall, it was really high quality, and I don't know that I've thought about interpreting that, but there were basically no throwaway applications there.
Did you source them through the usual channels, like through LinkedIn or Seek or the equivalent?
Yes. So it was, we posted the ad on Seek. So I posted a lot on LinkedIn and, did the standard things, tagged my friends who might have friends, again, networks, but online. So because this one in particular was there are a lot of different profiles that would fit the role. This is the data scientist in a biology lab. It's not a niche that exists really. So I was very happy to adapt to the right person. The right person would manifest themselves, is what I thought, and they did. So then I tagged in my LinkedIn posts, I tagged people from biology, people from data science, people from data engineering, people from startups, because that's very relevant in the sort of thing that we're doing. And then, you get a good enough reach that way, and you get really good candidates that way, and you get referrals that way.
It's interesting in the way that you've kind of framed the role, which is that it's not necessarily ABCXYZ. This is what we need, which under normal circumstances, I feel like is the right way to go about it. Thinking in a lot of detail about what exactly you want, clear criteria. That way you can set up the process to then measure those things and not get derailed. But it's almost like this role is so atypical, doesn't really fit a mold. And so you have to take this slightly more flexible approach where things developed as you're hiring, I imagine.
Yeah, quite a bit. So we had a few things in mind so there's two of us, two science people, and well, if I could count myself as a science person anyway, and HR involved in this. So we're each bringing a different thing. So I'm thinking as a service org leader, or manager, I'm thinking, well, here are the things we need. Then the scientist who is the client who's on the panel is thinking, this is what I need from this person. And the HR person is thinking, well, how do these skills tie up together? Let's think about this person's communication and all these kind of really basic things that you might miss sometimes. So as we got these applicants through, yeah, we definitely were appreciating different things that they could do, but we had some real touchstones that we couldn't do without. So even though we were quite flexible, we needed the person coming in to code in Python. That was a real requirement because of various reasons. But being like a proper coder, I put this in quotes because there is no such thing, but somebody who's been in production environments who understands how these things work, that was one touchstone. And then everything else was quite flexible. We wanted them to, we had a long wish list of things. Hey, do you know how client work works? Hey, do you know how, you know, DevOps works? Hey, what kind of large programs have you delivered? Have you done any project management? So there were a lot of things that were important, and we were just going with essentially, it wasn't explicit, but essentially a matrix where this person can code the way we need them to code and teach other people and be a certain example. And then how many of these other things do they tick? Okay, let's see how these people will shape up, and let's invite a few of them for an interview and see how we work together. And we also gave them we didn't give them a coding exercise, but we gave them an assignment that we can talk about.
You mentioned, so you sort of had a matrix, but it wasn't explicit in the sense that you weren't measuring them against each of these criteria, or was more like a on-off binary kind of classification?
Yeah, I was, but it wasn't such a strict points ranking. Well, it was a little bit, but it was basically, and I'm blanking on what I remember there are three basic things, and it was the Python coding was one of them, and there were other two that were not quite as important as that, but they were also basic. So essentially, to consider somebody to bring them for an interview, they'd have to fulfill all those things. Uh, and then we were a little more loose. But yeah, we were able to get, I think we got 5 people in for an interview in the room and figure out how they work and get a little bit of a vibe, obviously.
I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Given how rapidly LLMs have advanced and their seeming ability to do coding pretty well, if you were to hire this role again now, would you still have the hard Python requirement?
That's such a great question. We talk about this all the time, and I talk about this with data scientists all the time, and with people who teach Python or teach programming in general. Where I think we're in this job, yes, I still want them to understand how coding works. So I'm looking forward to the very near future where all coders just have to be testers, and you don't actually need to do the coding. You just set some assertions and find niches and find exceptions and all these kind of things, and the machine codes for you. That's great. Because this role is also supposed to be somebody who trains people how to think about coding, I would still want to hire somebody who can code. It's this has happened in every phase of automation. You don't need to be able to do the process because the machine does the process, but you need to be able to fix the machine when it breaks. And to fix the machine, you need to understand the exact steps the machine has to take to make the widget. So we're still in that phase. We need one person like that in the team. And so I would hire the same way. But maybe what I might do differently today is to actually give them a coding assignment because they would do it with a co-pilot. I didn't want to give a coding assignment, even though, yeah, co-pilots were already pretty advanced to do that. But I wasn't interested in that primarily knowing that a co-pilot will be available and they'll be getting better every day. I didn't really want to give somebody a coding assignment and say, okay, go solve this problem, because it's not about the coding part, it's about the logic part, and it's about understanding domain. So we gave them something that's a combined coding practices and quickly getting spooled up on the domain. That was the thing that's really crucial for this role. So that's a lucky thing that we were looking for somebody who would be a data scientist in a very niche domain. So we needed to see how quickly somebody can get spooled up with a domain enough to be useful. There isn't the expectation that you'll go learn genetics in a week to deliver a project. But you go out there and you read enough docs and you do enough Copilot coding to deliver something on the technical side of genomics. Here's an algorithm that does the thing you asked for. Is this good enough? Okay, great. So that's how we treated this.
I'm interested in those. I think you mentioned 5 candidates who got to that stage. Were they on a similar playing field in terms of that domain knowledge, in that they all had to kind of learn it from scratch, or did some already have some experience there?
We had a couple of people who were biologists. I think there were 2 people on the shortlist who were either had worked in uh, what was called bioinformatics, which is a word that kind of it's data science, but it's got its own word because it's specific to biological domains. But it's also much more limited than data science, because it's essentially domain expertise is primary two technical skills, I would say, in the bioinformatics domain. Somewhat. There's exceptions. But yeah, there were two people who were, I think there was one biologist, one bioinformatician, and then other people who had some exposure to biology projects through work as data scientists, as consulting data scientists. I think two of them had that. Yeah, so it was roughly half the people had some domain expertise, and yeah, the other half had none, essentially.
And when you thought about evaluating those candidates, because they're not completely on the same level playing field in a sense, like if part of what you're looking for is can this person learn this domain and apply their Python data science skills to this domain, and some of them already have that a bit of that knowledge anyway. Would you have evaluated them in a slightly different way? Would you, for example, have thought about the ones who had no domain knowledge at all and then somehow produce something of value in a week, thinking, wow, that's pretty amazing. I can see their growth potential is high. Or, even if their end result was not maybe as high a quality as the ones who already had the domain knowledge, like how did you think about that comparison?
Well, that's where the assignment came in, because we didn't give them coding. So we were trying to get it. So, okay, when I worked at Atlassian, there's a thing I think about all the time. There was a long corridor that joined Jira and Confluence teams at the time. And it was probably like 10 meters long or something, just long corridor connecting two buildings. And over the whole 10 meters of it, it had progress over perfection plastered on it, like progress much greater than perfection. So I think about this all the time. I think about just delivery and iteration all the time. So that was one of the principles that kind of made me choose this assignment method, which was not a coding assignment. It was essentially a logic assignment. So it was something you can whiteboard, and something that allowed us to really get into somebody's immediate problem solving and comfort with unknown domains. So I got this from it's not my idea. I got this from somebody else, but I don't know if they want to be named. So I'll say thanks. But it was basically the niche that I'm in, which is a scientific domain, a research domain, but one where you might attract somebody who doesn't already know the underlying scientific domain. So we gave them a paper that was a very technical paper, which was a techniques paper essentially, but specifically in biology. So the paper is MetaCell, which is basically clustering, but in a biologically specific way. So when you do genomics, gene sequencing, and you identify genes, and you have cells that have all these genes expressing or not expressing, and there are specific ways to cluster them and to get interesting results out of that. And MetaCell is an emerging technique in that area. And it's something we were interested in implementing in the lab. So I thought, great, let's get these people to read a summary paper for all the implementations of MetaCell. And I will make it really clear that, hey, don't go crazy. Spend a couple hours reading this, and we're going to talk about these two things. So it was really basic stuff. How would you implement a pipeline? Which you had to just read the paper. And if you could ask a question of the author of the paper, what would it be? That was the formula. That's not my formula. I took that from a friend. So the great thing that happened is that then you don't actually need to spend your whole week on that, which is something I really don't like. I've never been in the position where I couldn't really do it as a job seeker, but every time I would spend like 8 to 16 hours or a whole weekend on a coding assignment. I was thinking, well, what if I had kids? What if I had other responsibilities? No way. Now I have a huge advantage over people in different circumstances. And I thought, well, what does this say about a place that is okay with that? What does it say? And okay, yeah, anyway, because you can't control for people being in different circumstances. You just don't. You just disqualify a whole bunch of people essentially. And again, because we're doing this a year ago, whenever you can get a Gen AI to write your whole assignment, that doesn't really matter. So what we really wanted to see is how they rationalized everything and how they all the decisions they made, why they made them. And then we had people we had two people come in with quite astonishing uh, solutions to the thing. It was really impressive, really, really impressive. So we were even spoiled for choice. So we had one person say, "Well, how would you implement the thing?" Well, obviously, I would do the thing they say in the paper, except how about steps 5 and 6? Why would they recommend that? Because I would do this. And it kind of blew my mind when this person suggested that. It was not something I'd thought of. So, well, that's brilliant. Yeah, actually, that's a great point. That's a really good thing to implement. And then the other person who came in said, "Well, look, this is how I would implement it. These are the steps. I actually wonder about this other thing," and then pulls out another paper from his satchel. It's like, actually, I was reading one of the sources and I was wondering about this. What does this mean? Does this mean what I think it means? I just look at the scientist next to me who was on the panel, like, oh my god, this is a little bit impressive. That's not to say that. So this person didn't spend endless hours on this, but that's what we were trying to diagnose, right? How quickly can you spool yourself up with the technical aspects of this? Don't get bogged down in the science, which you will not know. It's not the requirement for your role to understand what these genes do. It's the technical part. And that showed us, these two people showed us really clearly they can focus on the technical bit, which is our role as a support team, as a science support team. And then they had great ideas, and then they had really good ways of communicating their ideas. So that's all we needed to know. Because we're in an environment where pretty much, the majority of people who applied clearly had and demonstrated the ability to learn new things. But that quickness, that I read the thing you gave me, and I'm spooled up on the things I need to be spooled up on, which you can do in a couple of hours, even with a complicated paper.
Yeah, it shows that real laser focus and not being overwhelmed by a massively complicated paper, which just trying to put myself in their shoes, like what would my approach to that be? I would definitely overthink it. Would be my starting point. Would be like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to go and research all these XYZ things. Um, if I was given that assignment right now, I'd probably go to Claude and ChatGPT and say, well, give me some summary, teach me these concepts in like kindergarten terms or something. I'd be trying to go down that route. Um, did any candidates use, can you remember, an LLM to help them along the way to understand the paper?
As far as I know, they didn't. The people who really impressed us, I don't think they did. But I totally agree with you. And also, just to put a sidebar that we made it clear that you don't need to understand the underlying science. So we did give them the instruction, but again, some people will get overwhelmed, will go overboard and try to understand too much. So that's part of the test, right? But then also to confirm, to just kind of validate that I do that all the time. So if they had done that for the assignment, great. I do that on the job all the time because I don't know genetics, I don't know biology, I don't know immunology. So when I'm in this context and I'm trying to manage a project, I'm on, GPT-4o did a pretty good job of teaching me genomics, including the algorithms from the 90s that people use, including the specific packages that people use. It did a better job than courses I've taken. That's been really interesting. And okay, somebody spent the better part of 10 years on sustainability. That's the carbon that I spent learning genomics was a little bit unacceptable. But if we can harness that stuff in a more productive way and in a cleaner way, it's astonishing how much you can get and how, for technical people, how much of a shortcut you can get. Because if I'm working on a project that has deep domain, I just need somebody to get me unstuck for a second so I can do the technical bit, get the job delivered. And frankly, do I need to remember this specific thing in 6 months' time? No, no, I don't. I just need to solve this problem. If it comes up again, then my memory will be rejigged and I'll remember it the third time. If you need to remember a third time, it's important. But that's the main way I've been using LLM foundation models and agents over the past year or so.
It's a good perspective you've given that you don't necessarily need to learn this You don't need to put it in your hard drive. It's okay if it's in your RAM, basically.
Precisely. I mean, even as a scientist, I did that. There were times when people looked at me funny because I would forget basic things. Even when I was, I'll write a paper in astrophysics, and a colleague or somebody who's reviewing the paper before I submit would review a thing, would just catch a thing and say, "Hey, how about this thing? How would you get around that?" And I would say, "I don't remember, but it's gonna be in my notes. I'll come back to you later." And they thought I was the stupidest person alive because how can you not remember a thing you put in your paper? Well, I got the paper written. That was my objective. I had to get over that thing. I looked it up. It probably took me a while to look it up, but I ticked that box. I said, this assertion is correct. I wrote down somewhere why I think this assertion is correct so I can refer back to it, but I didn't have it off the top of my head. And that was fine. The paper was fine.
Yeah, once you've committed it down to paper or some digital copy, I guess it's good. I just think of myself also used to write a lot of Jira tickets for our product. And if I went back to it, a month after I'd written, I wouldn't know my logic of why it needed to be exactly the way I'd written it. But I know at the time I'd solved the problem. There was a very good reason why it had to be X, Y, Z. I can't necessarily remember it now, but as long as you get it down, then it's all good. um, one theme of our discussion so far has been skills acquisition, learning new things, kind of adaptability. You mentioned yourself as a scientist, it's kind of just a given that you could be able to acquire all these new skills and knowledge. You have to go and do it, which is I think a great mindset. You've also mentioned in this process, like giving the candidates something that had them learn and adapt on the spot, basically. Given how quickly technology is changing, AI in particular, is that skill, that mindset going to be even more crucial now, as opposed to maybe some other bit of the world where you might have lived your 50 years and, in the dark ages and nothing really changed? Now we're at the opposite end of the spectrum. Things are changing all the time. Do we all have to learn and adapt even more quickly?
I think the thing especially people who learned in the previous version of this world, pre-transformer world, the thing that I think we need to be really good at, get good at, is to not be precious about solutions and skills that we've acquired that become obsolete. That I noticed about 10 years ago when I was working at Atlassian. We were running a few things, and it was the emergence of certain auto ML things. It was Profit by then Facebook. That was a wonderful auto ML suite. And of course, all of us people trained in proper stats and whatever, you know, most people were not keen on Profit taking away their enjoyment of writing a beautiful model. It's real. I mean, you hone these skills for so long, and then suddenly they're just automated. That can take away a lot of the certainly takes away the time for craft that we have to make for job satisfaction. That's a big adjustment that I've had to make. And it takes away the satisfaction of being a person who knows how to do the thing. So I think I would imagine for people training now, junior people, I don't think that will be as overdeveloped as it has been with people my age. And I hope not, because it's hard to shed, I'll tell you that. I mean, that was the test that convinced me and changed me forever. We ran, so there was this kind of AutoML. Well, there was this task we needed doing. It was something we could automate, and we, as a test for profit. This is probably 2016 that I'm talking about, so quite a while ago. As a test, we're thinking, okay, maybe we can automate this when we can trust an algorithm, a gray box, to do this. But maybe the technology is not quite there yet. Let's see. But we went into it with open eyes and open minds. So I took on the task of making the old-fashioned model, the proper, actually tune everything, actually roll it out, write all the code that automates the actual underlying machine learning process, do testing, do all kinds of stuff. And then the other data scientists on the team just did the Profit implementation. Of course, he was done much faster, And okay, there were edge cases where my bespoke algorithm was much better, but it wasn't really worth the time I spent on it, and it certainly wasn't going to be worth the maintenance of it because I built the thing, I have to maintain the thing. If you're outsourcing the maintenance of the thing, you're just deploying and it's kind of great. So that was the test that kind of sold me, and well, sold me. It convinced me that this is the world we're in now. These things are gonna get so much better, and that's it. Now I'm on the implementation side, and the important skill is figuring out how to put all these things together, and not necessarily, it had already been some time since I'd written linear algebra. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. That's not true. I remember coding regression models in SQL for some reason in a previous job because we kind of just had to for this really niche application. So, a proper developer and I locked ourselves in a room for 3 days and came up with linear algebra and SQL. Horrendous stuff, but we did it. So I was that close. I was maybe a couple of years detached from going down to a pretty low level to build these things, and then suddenly for that an equivalent task of that and a little bit superior in terms of complexity, yeah, it's a one-liner now. Just do it.
Well, as someone who shuddered in their econometrics class back in undergrad, if anything, I'm happy with this development. Um, and how much easier it's become. I wonder if part of the challenge we're going to have to overcome is that uh, people's identities are caught up in their jobs, and so people would, "What are you?" I am a coder. If that's what you've been saying for 20 years, and now that bit of your job, which is according to the way you describe yourself, all of it, if that is surely on the precipice of being eliminated, um, then people are going to have to really just rethink mindsets and rethink who we are and what we do. Because if not, you're going to be pretty miserable, I would have thought.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely had to go through that adjustment, and I've done it a couple of times also because I moved from research science to data science, which was already a big step, and now recently the past few years from what is a data scientist. And actually, a penny dropped in my head just now as you said that, because I've been thinking about this framing, which is a bit trite, but it's real, that startup people talk about all the time, which is that you're not building a product, you're solving a problem. And now that we're having the discussion, I know why that's on my mind as much, because I've had to take other people on that journey as well to tell them that, hey, it doesn't matter for us to craft this beautiful code. We can take the shortcut because we are actually here to solve this problem. And I guess that's a really good framing for that now that I think of it. Because I've had, again, I really had to let go of this craft person thing and at some level make myself my identity as a professional as a problem solver. That's been the shift that works for me. And again, it's a uh, there's we associate we kind of put prestige on things, and being a craft person, being a coder, being a data scientist, being somebody who does the, I don't know, even down to the linear algebra, that gives you prestige. That gives you a sort of thing. Oh, this is the very smart person. This is because we operate in tech. We operate in a domain where intelligence is currency. Where really we make our living by solving problems, not by virtue of being smart, but not by token. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, a bit of a dose of humility and a bit of a slap in the face maybe is helpful every now and then to bring us back down to earth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that again, it's for me it's been easy because well, it's not been easy, but I've had the path because I did get those slaps in the face. I remember the first project I started running after I left academia, and I went so deep. Somebody asked me, "Hey, can we make a little widget that predicts how much electricity somebody might generate with solar panels on their roof?" this was quite a while ago. So now there's 100 tools that will do that online for you because everybody's got survey data. Everybody knows what pitch your roof has and whatever. But in 20, I don't know, 14, whatever, 15, there was no such tool. So I thought, okay, great. How do I go about building this? And a week later, the product manager comes to check in with me, and I'm like knee deep in building some GIS system for even fetching the data to begin with. It's like, whoa, man, no, like, just let's talk next week and just tell me if we can make it. Don't make it, just tell me if we can make it. So that shift, that was week one in my first kind of real job, so to speak, outside academia. And immediately I'm like, oh, this is a different context. So that really immediately put me in a different mode. And then the technology changing again gave me the next, the next little bit of a wake up call. So now I'm pretty, let's solve this problem in the best way possible. And if that's paying a couple of bucks for a thing that already exists, obviously, and it's cheaper than building it ourselves, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and you mentioned startups, and that's the mindset you always have to have is, like, what? Oh my God, why build it ourselves if there's just a package we can install? A company I used to work at, there was a phrase that was used slightly sarcastically there, which is NBH, not built here, because it's like please, we have to make it ourselves no matter what it is. We're going to build our own email service if we have to. I'm sure that mentality's changed these days, but it's so easy to get stuck in that mindset. And if you just think about you're solving the end problem for your end user and customer, that gives you a sense of clarity, makes everything easier.
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to do that. For me now, it's easy because we're a service team. We're a science support team. So our satisfaction also it's an alignment. It's a classic alignment thing. Incentives are aligned. The customer wants a solution to their problem. If we solve more problems, we get more job satisfaction. It's a pretty nice alignment. But it always creeps in for me as well. Well, yeah, I can import this package, but wouldn't it be nice to write our own thing because we can do this niche little thing? And you do consider it. You always consider making your own stuff. We do make a lot of our own stuff because sometimes even because the package things are crept up way too far into a niche. Like that also happens. The package that you get off the shelf is way too much in a specific paradigm that we don't think has legs for more than a year or two. So yeah, okay, we'll build our own. But it hasn't gone away, but you have to shift your criteria a little bit.
Hercules, as a final question today, if you could ask our next guest one question, what question would that be?
Well, being a little scientific, I just have to say who's the next guest and what domain are they and all that. No, I'm kidding. I would ask. I am such an overthinker, Tim. You're giving me the hardest assignment now because I'll immediately gone into like, what kind of people will be on this podcast and what kind of things will they know? Um, what would I ask the next guest? How are you doing? How's the world for you? Has everything turned upside down? I think I would ask that first and then see where I go. I just talk to people all the time who are like, man, I don't know how this is going to turn out. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I talk to people who are anxiously anticipating AGI so they can slot their startup into it. So I'd ask, has everything changed for you? Has your entire world changed in the past week or month?
Wow, that's a great one. Okay, I will level that at our next guest, whoever that may be, and see what their reaction is. I guess they'll give me a profound answer, maybe. It's my feeling anyway. Well, Hercules, it's been a great chat today. We've covered off a lot of ground. We've taken a trip around the world, learning about yourself and your background and all your different experiences. And you've given us a lot of food for thought, a lot of insights. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.